even one of them for your own desire? Then why would you believe that I could? You are liars all. You promised forgiveness, then make its acceptance impossible.
What? What was that? Oh God, shut up!
Oh my God, you actually are crying.
I'm not crying! Not!
Magnus the Red, the Crimson King, the Primarch who did everything in his power to do the right thing, only to find himself turning against his father in the end. Magnus' story, to many, is the single greatest tragic tale of all the traitor Primarchs. In this series, it has been my joy to look at the Emperor's decisions and do my best to understand intent and reasoning. It has also been my joy to rant and rave. I'll be doing both in this episode. Not just on the Emperor's side, because while Angron's story was defined by a complete lack of understanding, and Perturabo's story was driven by much the same, Magnus' story is driven by something far different. Pure and simple hubris. Not just from the Emperor's side, but from Magnus's as well. The fall of Magnus still lies solely on the Emperor in my eyes because of the reasons that I will go into soon, but Magnus' own hubris lended more than his own share to the pot. One of the hardest things about theory crafting on this scale when it comes to the nature of the Emperor is being your own harshest critic. It has been my assertion that the very nature of the Emperor led to the decisions that he made throughout the course of the Unification Wars and the Great Crusade, and indeed in the Horus Heresy itself. I have to take each decision into consideration one at a time, weighing them out and seeing if they fit the model that I've been constructing since I began brainstorming. It has took almost a month and a half to properly articulate my position, and I'm still working out the nuances with each decision made. It's my personal motto that any opinion that cannot be properly defended without resorting to nonsense isn't an opinion worth having. My initial position changed almost 180 degrees before I started writing the script for the first Voxcast in this series. With each subsequent Voxcast, I have continued to iron this theory out. That theory is this. The Emperor's decisions were brought on by impatience, hubris, and an inability to understand some of the more basic drives and emotions of his sons. I thought that the Voxcast about Lorgar would be the ultimate test of this theory. I was wrong, because even though understanding the Emperor's decisions as it came to Lorgar came in the form of meticulously going through the timeline of the Great Crusade and deconstructing, once I pieced the timeline together, the decisions of the Emperor made perfect sense.
Doesn't anyone notice this? I feel like I'm taking crazy pills!
The hardest test of this theory came with my understanding of why the Emperor made the choices that he made as they related to his son Magnus. After my brainstorming session for this Voxcast, however, a question has been asked several times that finally has an answer. I have said that the Emperor was impatient in a rush to advance the Great Crusade. The answer to that question also answered other questions about the decisions of the Emperor. After Erda was nominated for Mother of the Millennia, Magnus the Red landed on the world of Prospero. There has been speculation about the planets that several of the Primarchs landed on. Some of the Primarchs, like Sanguinius, seem to land on purely random worlds, while others, like Guilliman, landed on worlds that would serve their greatest talents. No other world was as perfectly suited for a Primarch as Prospero was for Magnus. Prospero was colonizing the expansion of humanity by Psykers who chose the planet simply because it was difficult to find, and because they faced persecution almost anywhere else. It was on this planet, with its almost entire population cyclically gifted, that the most powerful Psyker of the Primarchs landed. Magnus did not have to conquer his world. The population simply elevated him to be their leader because of his psychic might. After the extermination of a species known as the Psychnuine, Magnus turned his full attentions to the esoteric. The capital city of Prospero, as well as its population, became beautiful from the prosperity that Magnus achieved on this planet. Magnus set about turning the world into a paradise, and the population was encouraged to use their psychic gifts, in the open, trained by the leaders of the world. Magnus's rise to leadership and subsequent rule of the planet was almost completely bloodless in comparison with most of his other brothers. This was not the only way in which Magnus differed from his brothers. Magnus alone never considered that he was actually lost, because he never really felt like he lost contact with the Emperor. He remembered the gene labs back on Terra and knew that he had been created by the Emperor to serve a purpose. When the Emperor drew near enough that Magnus could feel his presence, they began communicating psychically. And when the Emperor finally arrived on Prospero, the two embraced like a father and son who had been separated. For the Emperor, Magnus seems to have held a special place, similar to that of Dorn and Horus. While in this series has been my insistence that the Emperor viewed his sons as tools, what is clear is that some of the Primarchs were clearly more visibly valued than others, and Magnus was clearly no exception. The reasons behind this should not be too surprising. Horus was eventually to be the War Master, the Emperor's general. Dorn was to be the guardian of the Imperium. But the role Magnus was to play, in the end, was greater than any other Primarchs.
Attention all hands. Translation in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Oh, what the hell, second.
Please enjoy this musical selection while your party is reached.
Putting this on speaker. Come on, Valletta, pick up. Captain...
What?!
Scarlet?
That's Captain Verletta to you, Commissar, or Inquisitor, or whatever the hell else you're called these days.
Are you drunk?
Not nearly enough to be listening to you.
Are you shitting me?
Buckle up, Buttercup. We're in the warp, going to Hobbitus 7.
Why are we in the warp? And why are we going to Hobbitus 7? And why is there a Hobbitus 7 in the first fucking place?
Listen up, asshole! This is my fucking ship, so sit down, shut up, and enjoy the ride.
I'm in the middle of a Voxcast,
Captain Verletta, asshole!
I'm in a Voxcast talking about the fucking traitor Primarchs, Verletta.
Oh, look at you, big man, old man, talk about very important things. I don't fucking care. I want 3 things. 1, you to stop calling the bridge when I do something with my fucking ship. 2, more AMSEC. And
Cab.
3, shut the fuck up when I'm talking, you silly bitch with your stupid fucking hat. Did you get that? Yes? No?
We're in the warp while I'm on a live Voxcast talking about 2 traitor Primarchs, Captain Verletta.
So what?
So you pulled us into the warp to go to some Lord of the fucking Rings planet to get some more Amasak. That's what you're telling me.
Yes?
You have literally 5 cases in the hold.
3.
There were 6 there last week!
No, there are 3.
You've gone through 3 full cases of Amasek in a fucking week?
Hence why we need to go to Hobbitus 7.
Why there?
AMSEC, asshole! In transmission!
Okay. Alright, where was I before the alcohol-fueled binge? Right. The Emperor shared traits with his son, and Magnus was no different. In no other Primarch was the evidence of psychic might more in the open. Magnus's form seemed to simply boil with hidden power, and just as the Emperor used his psychic abilities to augment his appearance, Magnus seemed to do the same. When the two were reunited, they spent a long time together simply exploring the Immaterium. The Emperor, side by side with Magnus, both teaching and warning his newly found son about the benefits and dangers in the warp. As with every Primarch, Magnus was given his legion, the 15th. 5 years after the departure of the Great Crusade from Terra, many of the 15th began to display latent psychic powers. The Legion would conquer worlds simply from the use of their abilities alone, forcing compliance through mental manipulation rather than conquest. The use of these tactics, when they were first noticed, caused friction, most notably with the newly found Primarch of the 6th Legion, Leman Russ, who viewed anything other than a frontal assault as a cowardly act not worthy of praise and recognition. It also raised alarm and contention with other legions, whose Primarchs had had to fight against psychic overlords on their home worlds. Aside from this, the Emperor was pleased with their rate of progress, but suddenly the delight of the Space Marines of the 15th Legion turned to horror. Sudden, rapid degeneration began to manifest in the Legion. This condition, known to the Legion as the Flesh Change, swept through large portions of the Legion like a plague. The Flesh Change would strike at random, and sometimes within minutes, what was once a proud Legionnaire would be reduced to a gibbering mass of flesh. This condition was horrifying, and the Legion's numbers began to drop rapidly. By the time the Emperor reached Prospero, the Legion was close to extinction. Here is where we come to the first major mistake of the Emperor as it relates to Magnus. The 15th was on the verge of extinction, an extinction that apparently not even the Emperor was either willing or able to repair. It is suggested that in some places and outright affirmed in others within the lore that the Legionnaires would at some point need their Primarch. What the Primarch would be needed for exactly isn't really known. But when Magnus informed the Emperor that he had cured the issue that was causing the flesh change in the 15th, the Emperor seemed to have no questions as to how. Magnus, in his desperation to save his legion, turned to what he knew best, the Immaterium. In the warp, he encountered a being that claimed to be able to stop the rampant genetic degradations in his legion, and he struck a deal with that being, a deal which cost him much more than what he actually thought he was bargaining. In the end, Magnus sealed the deal with the warp entity, and on his return to his sons the flesh change was no more, and Magnus had a new name, the Red Cyclops, as he had sacrificed his eye to seal the pact. When the flesh change stopped, there were only around 1,000 left alive in the entirety of the 15th Legion. 1,000 sons of Magnus. Creative, isn't it? Now here's the issue. Even though the Emperor warned Magnus about the creatures in the warp that would seek to gain control over him and the scheming of said beings, Magnus still went ahead and sealed the deal with the entity. This entity was none other than Tzeentch.
Justice planned!
Magnus, even though he had been studying the warp since before he could even walk, who had emptied the combined knowledge of 10,000 years of people who used the warp into his head, and who had been just recently warned by the only being psychically stronger than him that there were things in the warp who would seek to control him. Not only does he go and try to strike a deal with one of the very things he's been studying and been warned about his entire life, but he strikes a deal with Tzeentch himself. This is yet another way in which Magnus differs from all the other Primarchs. When Magnus screwed up, Magnus went all out. Magnus never pulled a Lillian L. Johnson and sent away people he didn't know how to deal with back to their home world, where a century and a half later their centuries of abandonment would cause them to revolt. Magnus never pulled a Jagatai Khan, where not paying attention to the inner workings of his legion left him facing a near civil war within his legion when the Horus Heresy happened. No, when Magnus screwed up hard. The main question comes now, and that is why the Emperor just took the curing of the Legion at face value. Why did the Emperor drive the legions to conquer as hard as he did? Why did the Emperor not step in and tell Perturaba to take some time for creation as much as destruction? Why did the Emperor allow Lorgar to have a legion even though he was so obviously religious and also corrupted? Why did the Emperor give Angron his legion and have him push the crusade forward even though he knew the Butcher's Nails would kill him eventually? Why did the Emperor do any of these things and more that made little to no sense? I have said impatience, but I never gave the reason why. To be honest, I was trying to rationalize the reason by self, but it becomes blindingly clear with the next bit of lore we are going to cover. In the first year of M31, Magnus was called to the planet of Nikea for an event that will be remembered by many names. The Council of Nikea, the Trial of Magnus, and the Hearing of the Thousands, just to name a few. By the time of the Council, Magnus and the Thousand Sons had been pushing forward the Great Crusade for over a century, having rebuilt from practically nothing to a sizable formation of Space Marines. The Primarchs differed radically in their approach to warfare, but amongst them, Magnus's Legion was often criticized for the use of their Psykers. In fact, the majority of the Legion's battle tactics relied on the use of the Legion's psychic might. It's an easy statement to make that the more powerful the individual, the more powerful the ego, and some of the Legion's Primarchs simply saw the Thousand Sons as a problem at best and dishonorable cowards at worst. It was relatively common for Primarchs to hold their tactics as the best tactics, the most humane tactics. Take Conrad Kurz for example, who was shunned by almost all of his brothers for the Terra tactics he employed. Conrad's method of warfare would often deliver entire civilizations intact at the cost of a few hundred or a few thousand lives, where another brother who openly criticized him would deliver smoking ruins and a few billion corpses. The Council of the Nikea was nothing more or less than several of the Primarchs judging the Thousand Sons and their Primarch for their chosen method of war and loudly pronouncing their hatred of Psykers. It is here that I must discuss a complete asshole. Of all the many flagrant assholes and pricks in the 40k library of lore, I can honestly say I hold Othere Weirdmake in complete contempt and view his usage by Leman Russ as hypocritical at absolute best. Othere Weirdmake came to the Thousand Sons and made it a point to befriend Ahriman, a friendship that he gave every indication was true and honest. Then, on the council floor of Nikea, Othere Weirdmake committed probably number 4 in the top 10 anime betrayals, and promptly ass-fucked Ahriman for his trust, betraying him utterly, and using the information he gained to paint the Thousand Sons as sorcerers. This absolute piece of bullshit squeals like a stuck pig that everyone in Magnus's legion were sorcerers, even though his own stupid ass had the same abilities drawn from the same source. This fucking tosser didn't see it that way, however. Fucking Weirdmake decided that since he thought his abilities came from the fucking planet of Fenris, that it wasn't the same. This intensely assholic shitbird, even though it was clear he was a psyker, firmly insisted that he wasn't. He was a rune priest, which is apparently a big fucking difference because they don't get their power from the warp. Oh fuck no, see, Weirdmake gets his abilities from... Okay, fuck this.
Kesa namila te gro sa re re. I no more re yip ima seslu ut iman eskel ta sa desu ni ek renro off oreso da delam on ilibnat naikov ensis na tetabad pots klentra pro yekrof grof sekov akas.
What? What the fuck? Where am I?
Summon Othere Weirdmake.
Who the hell are you? How am I here? How did you summon me, mortal?
Summon Othere Weirdmake.
I destroyed his soul. I cannot summon him back. The warp does.
Listen here, Ahriman, you sanctimonious shit. You turned every non-psyker in your legion into literal dust bunnies. So get the fuck to it before I send a message to Gilliman letting him know you want your brain to, quote, unquote, blow new life and unleash 1,000 suns with her help.
Give me a minute.
Back to the Council of Nikea. There was very little to suggest that the Emperor had not already made up his mind about the future of Psykers being used in the legions. To call the events of the Council of Nikea a clusterfuck would be an understatement. The Emperor was on his way back to Terra to work on the Webway project, and this would be the last time most of his sons would actually see him before the events of the Horus Heresy. Several Primarchs were in attendance, including Leman Russ, although his presence was kept secret from everyone else. Mortarion was present, as was Sanguinius and Fulgrim. The council itself was mostly a kangaroo court, with the decision already in place before the trial even started. After Weirdmake backstabbed Ahriman, Mortarion gave a speech that was so heavily laden with bullshit one can fully understand what sort of gases Mortarion had pumped into the tubes that he inhales. After a short interlude in the proceedings, Magnus was allowed to speak for himself, but in truth the decision was already made. Despite the final words of a committee of the chief librarians of 12 different legions, the Emperor passed his judgment. All librarians were to be returned to the battle companies, forbidden to use their powers. The use of psychic power was to be forbidden for the Astartes and in effect for Magnus as well. It also introduced a new edict called the Chaplain Edict. This edict introduced the rank of chaplains inspired by the Wordbearers, a rank that was supposed to keep the other legions focused on the vision of the Emperor. The Council of Nikea had drastic effects, not only for the Thousand Sons and Magnus, but for the wider Imperium as a whole. 5 years later, the full extent of the consequences of Nikea will be shown in detail. As many would later state, including Gilliman, the eradication of the librarians and the legions denied the legions the best weapon against the creatures of the warp, and it seemed almost planned. Indeed, it seems as if it were, because something happened at the Council of Nikea that only the Custodians, the Emperor himself, and the Space Wolves actually knew about. While the debate was going on, a Custodian and a man named Caspar Hauser were watching the deliberations from far above the floor. Caspar Hauser was suspected of being a hidden one, a spy who was an unwitting spy, in the service of the Thousand Sons, unknowingly. As they watched, something in the guise of Amon, the Master of the Hidden One from the Thousand Sons, attacked both the Custodian and Hauser himself in what seemed to be an attempt to remove the compromised spy. Aside from some bullshit about the true name clause, which I will not go into, cabinet, and the fact Amon was essentially sitting in the amphitheater watching alongside Magnus, And aside from the fact that the thing that attacked the custodian Hauser was actually a demon, a demon manifesting in real space about 100 yards from Magnus, and the fucking Emperor. Sorry, I'm allergic to hideous plot points. This attack was reported almost immediately, and while the Emperor might have gone softer on Magnus and the Thousand Sons, this event pretty much sealed the deal.
Commissar!
Perturabo?
Is the rabid weasel here?
No, she's in prayer.
Good. I don't care for loud noises. Now then, I have been working day in and day out since we last parted ways. I have been planning and waiting, you see. I have spent an inordinate amount of time analyzing your weaknesses and preparing my strategy. I have accounted for every possible outcome, and I have at least 5 ways of destroying you. And now, nothing can save you. From my new army build.
Wait, what?
You remember, don't you? The Battle Mace 42 million game we planned? When I saw your collection of guardsmen, I knew that you were no slouch. And so, I spent some of my time building a new army. Behold!
Oh, that is so cool!
My new miniature army of Chaos Knights and Dark Mechanicum auxiliaries. All entirely automated, as you can see, moving and acting on their own. They even follow simple commands via remote control. Of course, I had to omit actual weaponry from their design for the sake of sportsmanship, but I'm certain they could at least dispatch a Gyrax with a few good kicks. With this force, I am confident that I shall soundly crush you and your little soldiers.
Yeah, only one problem with that right now.
Wait. Are you doing another Voxcast?
Kinda caught me in the middle of one, Perturabo.
Oh, damn it all. Let's just hope your Imperial watchdogs censor all of that. Well, I will return in a few hours. Knights, back through the portal.
Maybe you could give us a little insight on how you felt about the Council of Nikea.
Oh, you're talking about that. The trial of Magnus the Red. Well, as you said, I was told to build the amphitheater in which that farce took place. I was initially rather elated to finally be given something to do other than smack my own skull upon enemy fortifications. That amphitheater was the first thing that my father had ever asked me to build for him. The first and last time I was able to exercise my true talents in his name. When he came to me and gave me the task, I was foolish enough to allow myself to feel a modicum of excitement. However, when it became clear that the entire council was an orchestrated puppet show, host only to illogical and fallacious nonsense, well, I quickly concluded that I shouldn't have bothered building the damn thing. I would have gladly thrown the job at dawn, had I known what my work would be used for. I shouldn't have been surprised, really. The one time I was given something gratifying to do, and he just had to turn it sour. I wonder if he still would have come to me had the council not been a foregone conclusion, or if he only enlisted my aid because he knew it was destined to be a mockery of discourse. Probably. On the matter of the trial itself, I took the same position as I always had. Magnus was, and is, the only brother of mine with whom I had a genuine rapport, and I had always cautioned him against the use of the warp and quote-unquote sorcery. I cared for him, and I wished that he not suffer the same fate as a certain pair of forgotten ones, shall we say. I would have come to the same verdict in the end, had it been my decision, but that it was done so farcically and so illogically is my quibble. Magnus deserved better than that. Deserved a fairer chance than that.
The Council of Nikea showed another matter entirely. I have stated several times the Emperor was pushing the Great Crusade hard and that he was impatient. In truth, the Emperor saw an event like the Horus Heresy was coming. What he didn't know was who or when. It was clear that there was division growing between the Emperor and some of his sons, even though most of the Imperium would have been flat out offended if it had been suggested. The Emperor had a few of his sons that he was certain of their lasting loyalty. The rest he was not certain of. Horus was one of those sons who the Emperor was utterly convinced would never betray him. Also on that list was Sanguinius, Rogel Dorn, Lehman Russ, and Vulcan. Of the others, there were doubts, specifically with Conrad Kirst, Angron, and Jakatai Khan that are peppered throughout the lore. Now the answer becomes clearer. The main purpose in the unrelenting drive of the Crusade was to take as much territory as possible before the events of something similar to the Horus Heresy would inevitably come to pass. It was to get as much use out of the Primarchs and their legions before inevitably some would turn against him. When the Emperor left the Crusade after Ullanor, the writing was clearly on the wall for him. The Council of Nikea was something that he clearly did not want to do. In fact, in a conversation, Malcador the Sigillite revealed that he knew and had known that one or more of his sons would eventually turn from him. What is clear is that the Emperor wanted to complete the Webway project for more than the reasons he stated to Malcador. Remember that just after Ullanor, the Emperor called the Imperial Fist back to Terra to fortify the capital of the Imperium. The only reason to call upon a legion that's greatest strength is holding fortifications is because you expect fortifications to need holding. Also, should any of the legions have turned traitor after the Emperor had finished the Webway project, the Emperor could have easily sent the entirety of the Imperial Fist, Sisters of Silence, the Custodians, and entire Titan legions to the location of the traitor in question in a matter of hours. The Emperor knew that he was going to be betrayed. In fact, it's most likely he knew that it was a possibility before the Primarchs were scattered throughout the galaxy. After they were scattered, that possibility became an absolute certainty as he had no hand in their development. What is fundamentally clear is that part of the reason the Council of Nikea happened was to appease certain Primarchs, and Malcador the Sigillite makes a point later on that certain other Primarchs might have turned in the Horus Heresy if the ruling had not gone the way it did. I looked for the quote of this for over 3 hours, I still cannot find it. My nerd rage is endless. In truth, the entirety of the Council of Nikea makes me want to put my head through a wall. Not just on one side of the aisle, but on both. There were monumental errors made. I'll start with the Emperors. It's clear to me that even though the Emperor might have received bad information regarding the Thousand Sons and their Primarch, and even though he didn't want to be enacting the Edict of Nikea, the Emperor did not like the way that Magnus and his legions used the warp. At this point in the Crusade, we are past the position where the Emperor would have pushed them directly into conquest after Nikea. In fact, it was expected that the Thousand Sons would return to Prospero to refocus their legion in a new direction. One major question that is asked is why Magnus and the Thousand Sons were not recalled to Terra after the Council to assist in the Webway project. The answer to that is going to sound strange, but at the same time I find it fundamentally correct, while at the same time frustrating. While the Emperor had respect for Magnus' psychic might as well as the psychic might of the Thousand Sons, he found them to be fundamentally undisciplined in its use. The Emperor clearly thought that Magnus himself was too naive and idealistic in his approach to the warp, which in the end, he was, and so were the Thousand Sons. Hubris, impatience, and a lack of fundamental understanding. These were the primary reasons behind so many mistakes the Emperor made. At some point later in the lore, we find out that the Thousand Sons had been fundamentally corrupted by the warp, and in the Emperor's eyes, they were past the point of saving, even at Nikea. The Emperor's main mistake in all of this was not recalling Magnus to Terra immediately after the Council of Nikea itself. What infuriates me more than anything else is the fact that Magnus received a vision on Nikea, a vision of Horus betraying the Emperor. Instead of calling to the Emperor right then and there when he received the vision, he decided not to say a word, even though he was told that Horus is going to be transformed on a moon in the Davin system. Magnus was flat out told, right before he was going to stand in front of his dear old daddy and get the decision that led to the Edict of Nikea, that Horus was going to betray the Imperium. The fact he didn't tell the Emperor right then and there blows my mind, but it all comes back to the same thing that I've been talking about. Hubris, impatience, and a lack of fundamental understanding. And when Magnus screws up, oh by the Emperor does he ever screw up. Why didn't he tell the Emperor? The sins of the father are the sins of the son in this case. Hubris, pure and simple. At no point does Magnus actually consider telling his father. In fact, his first instinct on waking up for the vision is to immediately return to Prospero. He doesn't tell the Emperor who is in the next room because he claims the Emperor wouldn't believe him. But in truth, the reason he doesn't tell the Emperor is because Magnus is convinced that he can save Horus himself. When the Council of Nikea was concluded, he immediately went back to Prospero and almost instantaneously broke the Edict of Nikea, using astral projection to continue the research of what he had already learned in his vision. Let me make it clear what is happening here. Literal days after being told that breaking the Edict of Nikea would make him an enemy of the Emperor, Magnus willingly broke the Edict. He didn't do it because he absolutely needed to, or because it was a life or death situation. He didn't do it by any accident or because it was habit. He broke the Edict of Nikea because he believed he alone knew better than anyone else. Spoiler alert. Magnus screwed that up. Another spoiler alert. He does this habitually. Whoa, Airman, what the hell?
What is it, mortal?
What the hell are you doing?
I'm trying to summon their weird make.
What's with the pile of corpses? Can you explain to me exactly?
Mortal, you live in a galaxy filled with trillions of unwashed, stinking vermin.
And what does that have to do with a pile of corpses 2 meters high?
They are all named their weird make.
All of them?
Look, I told you this could take a minute. You 41st millennials sicken me. You just want a button to push, and you get what you want right when you want it. You don't have a mind to do any work for it. Oh no, you're just so used to getting what you want as soon as you want it. You don't even consider what it takes to get it done.
Did we just work a millennial versus Generation X argument into this Voxcast?
Exactly.
Fuck's sake, well did you have to kill them all?
And exactly what did you want me to do with them?
You could have always sent them back.
Look, Commissar, I don't tell you how to execute the walking bags of flesh you call guardsmen. Don't tell me how to execute bags of flesh that manifest out of the warp.
Those are not the same fucking thing! To take a long story and put it into a short version, Magnus tried to save Horus using astral projection, but his presence only took a bad situation and made it worse. His appearance to Horus and his open use of sorcery that was banned by the Edict of Nikea stunned Horus. In the end, Magnus' attempt to turn Horus away from the heresy only seemed to seal the fate of the galaxy. The only real gain was that Magnus learned that the Word Bearers had turned against the Emperor as well for all the good it did him. This was the point in which Magnus makes the worst mistake in the entire Horus Heresy series, and no other mistake made by anyone else in the entire lore comes close to this. Yes, I include every mistake of the Emperor in this statement, because if Magnus had not done what he decided to do, the Imperium would have been a far different place. Magnus decided at that point to warn the Emperor, which was a good thing considering what was to come, but the method in which he did destroyed everything that the Imperium could have been, and it all came down to two factors. The first was Magnus being utterly convinced he was in the right, and the second being Magnus not understanding the true nature of the power he wielded, and how easily it could be turned against him. The road to hell is paved with good intentions, and Magnus had the best intentions, as did everyone who participated in the Warpcraft to aid him. 900 mortals volunteered themselves to be sacrificed to help Magnus carry his warning to Terra. Note, these 900 were not coerced. They willingly gave themselves to the spell that Magnus was going to use, even though they knew it would kill them. With Ahriman presiding over the spell, Magnus launched his astral body. As the mortals used to add fuel to the spell died, Magnus' spiritual essence crossed the void between Prospero and Terra. Magnus, even though he was kept in the dark by the Emperor, had already realized that the Emperor was trying to tap into the Eldar Webway. It was his intent to gain access to the Webway, and use that to get to Terra faster. When his astral body reached the wall of the Webway, however, he found he couldn't breach it. It was at this moment that Magnus should have turned back and tried another way. It was also at this moment that Magnus doomed the Imperium. Magnus felt something in the tides of the warp and noticed a form within the miasma that he knew to be a sentience. The sentience offered him power with what seemed to be no ulterior motive, and Magnus took that power willingly. He breached the wall of the Webway, and without even thinking about the consequences, he followed the Webway straight to Terra. Often, when explaining what happened when Magnus came to Terra, it's difficult to fully articulate. The biggest question is, why did Magnus coming through the Webway cause so much damage? In the lore, it frequently says that irreplaceable circuits were destroyed, and that wards crafted with painstaking care were obliterated, and that's really all we got for the longest time, and it was the full extent of the explanation we received, but the reality is so much more destructive, so I will elaborate. When Magnus came to Terra, the damage that it was caused was comparable to a direct hit from a high-yield nuclear warhead. The first signs of the approach of the Crimson King were felt as headaches and agitations in the City of Sight, a district within the Imperial Palace where most of the psionic might of Terra was concentrated. It was felt in the Whispering Tower, which held the Choir Primus, the astropathic hub of communication on Terra. When Magnus' astral body breached the wards of the Imperial dungeons, the results were absolutely catastrophic. The psychic wards that had protected the outside world from the emanations of the Webway were quickly burned out. The damage had been done to the Webway project, and the Imperium's fate had been sealed, but the full effects of Magnus' folly were not done. The intense power of the psychic force began to systematically tear away at the most powerful wards the Emperor had ever constructed. And it took 2 years before those wards finally failed. The Emperor could not reinforce the wards because Magnus had imprisoned him on the Golden Throne through his ignorance. When those wards failed, the results outside were nothing short of cataclysmic. On the day that the wards failed, it had only been a few days after the Imperium had received word of the Istvan V drop site massacre. The final wards failed, and the full brunt of the psychic backlash was let loose on Terra. The sheer force that Magnus unleashed, as well as the wall of force from the warp itself, blasted through the Imperial Palace and beyond. It caused an earthquake powerful enough to knock statues off plinths, and the shockwaves shook the mountains. Entire segments of the population of Terra devolved into rioting and brutality across the planet. Millions committed suicide. Millions more were mentally rewired, causing entire families to simply forget who they were. Fathers forgot sons, mothers forgot daughters. Entire segments of the population became mentally wiped clean. Small villages simply vanished, never to be seen again. In other cases, populations vanished, leaving behind empty buildings. Creatures from the warp born out of nightmares of the population, as well as ancient myths, stalked across the face of Terra. Even the sleeping weren't spared from the era of Magnus, suffering nightmares so vivid some simply died in their sleep. Magnus' arrival had plunged the entirety of Terra into pure chaos. But of all the places in Terra hardest hit by the arrival of Magnus, none were as hard hit as the Whispering Tower, the astropathic hub of the Imperium where most psychers were housed and trained. Pure, unfocused psychic power quickly overloaded the failsafes built into the Whispering Tower and erupted like a tidal wave within the City of Sight. Many of the inhabitants simply fell apart mentally. Some fell victim to flesh change or were reduced to chaos spawns. The most severe damage, however, came in the form of what happened to the Choir Primus. Inside the Mind Hall of the Choir Primus was 2,000 of the most powerful second-tier psychers in the entire Imperium, who were completely mentally open to the warp so they could receive messages from the wider Imperium. No one in this chamber survived, and all of them would have preferred that death delivered at the hands of the Dark Eldar or the Night Lords. Their minds burned away inside their skulls, and they were powerless to stop it. What's worse is that every single one of them felt the other's pain in a cascade of agony. In a single instant, caused by Magnus's arrogance, the Imperium had been sundered completely. Terra itself almost plunged into a warp rift, the likes of which had not been seen since the one that destroyed the Eldar Empire, which later became known as the Eye of Terror. The communications hub of the Imperium had suffered massive casualties, with a full third of the essential psychers used to send and receive messages from the wider Imperium killed in the Choir Primus Mind Hall alone, not even including those who died outside of it. Cities were burning and the Imperial Palace was damaged. Worst of all was the cost to the Emperor himself, who was the only reason Terra did not disappear into a warp rift forever upon Magnus first arriving on Terra. Using his psychic might, the Emperor sealed the gaping wound in the warp gate, holding it closed against the tide of the warp. This was not something he could simply walk away from. This meant that even as the wards surrounding the Imperial Palace eroded and finally gave way, the Emperor could not spare the time to even reinforce them or ensure they would hold. This would also be far outside the ability of Malcador the Sigillite. In effect, Magnus had taken the Emperor completely out of the war, making him a prisoner on the Golden Throne almost 2 years prior to the events of Istvan V. And just when communication was needed most, just days after Terra was rocked with the news that 3 legions had been wiped out, that Ferrus Manus was dead, 2 more were missing, and 4 more legions had turned traitor, the heart of the Imperium had been crippled while the entire world fell into disorder. It is because of Magnus that even in the present day of the Imperium, the Emperor cannot leave the Golden Throne. Even the 3rd strongest psyker in the galaxy, Malcador the Sigillite, was physically and spiritually destroyed after only a few hours on the psychic amplifying throne. It is because of Magnus that 1,000 psychers are required to be sacrificed every single day to simply bolster the Emperor's mental abilities just enough to get through to the next day. It was only after destroying the Webway project, when the Emperor and Magnus touched minds, that Magnus realized how important he was eventually going to be to the Imperium, that he was going to be the one who controlled the Golden Throne. Magnus's role in the greater Imperium was to be the Emperor's instrument in the victory of humanity. The question can be asked as to why the Emperor didn't warn Terra about what was to eventually become a cataclysm on the planet. Perhaps he thought the words would hold, but even if he didn't, he did not know when they would finally give way. In the end, however, there was little that he could do, even if he did know the times the war would fail, if at all. Does this qualify as a mistake? No, I don't think so. The hit was coming, and the only thing that warning the public at large would do would have been to leave them in a sense of panic. If it was coming, there was simply nothing that could be done, and simply moving the apparatus of even the Choir Primus and the translation staff that they relied on would have proved even more time-consuming and devastatingly costly as the backlash itself. Magnus's astral body fled back to Prospero, but even as fast as his spirit went back to his body, he saw the tide of warp predators flooding into the holes that he had made in the Webway, ready to invade Terra. He didn't even know if his father could hold back the tide. When he arrived on Prospero, he went into isolation, already knowing what was going to happen if his father had survived. He wasn't the only one that knew. It was at this point that Tzeentch approached him without subtlety, informing Magnus that he was the one who had prevented the flesh change, and that the price of that had been Magnus's soul, a debt that the Changer of Ways now wanted paid. Magnus refused. He knew what was coming, but he refused regardless. Magnus was genuinely heartbroken because of the damage he had done, finally recognizing his flaws. He clouded the perceptions of his legions, cutting some off from their abilities to see the future and outright cut off communications with the greater Imperium. He even killed one of his sons to keep the fact that the wolves were coming to Prospero a secret, and he did it so well the 1,000 Sons didn't even know an attack was coming until they were literally being subjected to orbital bombardment. When the ground assault came, the 1,000 Sons had barely formed into a scratch defense alongside the planetary forces of the Prospero called the Spire Guard. The Space Wolves did not even face a naval threat, as Magnus had dispatched the entirety of his naval forces to other systems. The total numbers of the defenders amongst the Thousand Sons can be estimated to be around 10 to 13,000, supported by 85,000 planetary defense troops and about 8,000 tech adepts from a nearby Forge world, and 12 titans of the Legio Xenobax. Rumors that there were over 60,000 of the Thousand Sons are highly inaccurate. The Wolves came in at over 73,000 Space Marines, with 5,000 Sons of Horus supporting them, although what they were actually doing there was capturing Psychers. Alongside the Space Marines came 982 Custodians led by Constantine Valdor himself, and 3,000 Sisters of Silence led by Janetta Kroll. The Mechanicum sent forces alongside the Imperial armies, totaling some 43,600 infantry, 1,000 Sectari, 5 Warlord Psi-Titans of the Ordo Sinister, and 12 Titans of the Legio Mortis. In short, the Thousand Sons were subjected to a surprise attack by a numerically superior force designed from the outset to combat their strengths. The result of this battle was a foregone conclusion given those facts.
And it sucked.
Fuck! Put a bell on, you asshole!
Mortal, it is not my fault you have the situational awareness of a wet towel. I have weird make.
Oh well, let's go. Wait, why are you going that way?
I had to move rooms. By the way, I enjoyed listening to the last few Voxcasts you've done.
How did you even know how to...
Interwarp. It wasn't hard to figure out what to look for. Your damned symbol is on the screen right now.
What the hell are you talking about?
Interdimensional fourth wall-breaking, backflipping warp fuckery.
Figures. Why did you move rooms?
There are trillions upon trillions of swirling maggots in this Imperium. You'd be surprised how many cruel parents made a combo like, oh, they're weird make.
Exactly how many did you kill?
Oh, by the gods, does it actually matter? You vermin die constantly.
Call me vermin one more time, and I'll summon someone else. I assume you know of whom I speak.
Weasel.
Yes, her.
Understood. Carrying on.
Why is he screaming?
Well, when your soul is devoured, you are stuck there until someone wakes you up to reality. If you're reincarnated, then you're living that moment over and over again.
And the point of having him relive that is?
Amusement.
Right, carry on.
Do you think we should...
Well... fuck him.
Not to sound rude, but I have other places to be.
Right.
Ah! I will cut your thread with the murder make! Maleficarum! Maleficarum!
Oh, shut the hell up, you bootleg Yoda.
Yoda?
Well, he's stupid. Slap him again, I don't think he's fully come around.
What? Ow! What was that for?
Felt like it.
Ahriman?
Hello, old friend.
Where are we? We were fighting on Prospero.
Correction, I was fighting. You were losing.
And... fall further.
Well, since no one knows what you're on about, let me elaborate. The Space Wolves landed on Prospero with their entire landing force intact, then waged a war of genocide against the planet's defenders. Leman Russ himself led the attack, and even though the Thousand Sons and their support elements were taken off guard, they still managed to mount a basic defense.
It was a surprise attack. A genocide? No. They knew we were coming. The Wolf King tried to communicate, but we had no answer.
Magnus kept us in the dark. Continue, Commissar.
The fighting was close and brutal, with the Thousand Sons trying not to use their powers against the wolves for fear of succumbing to the flesh change, which once again was beginning to run rampant throughout the ranks. The casualties were extreme for both sides, but while Leman Russ had taken to the field, Magnus the Red remained in his tower in the period of Photon.
Because Magnus was a coward who did not want to join the murder make.
I can say many things about Magnus, but labeling him a coward isn't one of those things.
Not labeling him a... And why not? Why?
Because he would have rather died than caused damage to another loyalist legion. We practically mutinied against him when your rabble came for us.
Oh, so you mean to say that your oh-so-magical Primarch did not join the murder make because he was loyal? No, he simply meant to continue his lies.
Okay, what the hell are you on about?
Ha! Really? You? You asked me what the hell I'm talking about! You realize it's lies! It's all lies! Magnus the Red tried to convince the Emperor that Horus had turned traitor. A ridiculous concept. He proved his sorcery and treachery when he sent his necromantic doings to Terra, claiming he was warning us. The Wolf King saw through his lies. Magnus wanted to feel important and wanted to validate his dark powers. So, he told lies to the Emperor about his beloved son Horus. And then he lied to you, Ahriman, so you would die and make him look the martyr. And he would die and look the betrayed, even though he was the one who was betraying you and playing you and your Marines for fiddles all along.
Okay, are you actually trying to say that Magnus sent a false warning to Terra, breaking the edict of Nikea to warn the Emperor that Horus was going to betray him, then refused to take the field against the Space Wolves, and he allowed his legion and would have allowed himself to die, and he did that because he wanted to reinforce his lie?
Yes, reinforce his lie. Exactly.
That is
Just fucking stupid!
Stupid! Fucking stupid! No! It is what the Wolf King believed!
And this is why I made my own war band. Commissar, continue, please. I have to get back to my own affairs after all.
Right, weird mate. Do you know of anything after you fought Ahriman?
No.
Okay then, as the battle raged on, the Thousand Sons eventually turned to their psychic might, having viewed it as a last resort and now knowing they were in a fight for their very existence. The Thousand Sons were fighting not only the Space Wolves and their supporting groups, they were also fighting against the Flesh Change that was suddenly tearing through their ranks. The Space Wolves, for their part, unleashed everything they had against the Thousand Sons, including the Wolfen, Space Marines so mutated by their gene seed that they were little more than howling animals. It was at this moment that Magnus finally entered the fray right at the steps of the Pyramid of Photep. He fought the Wolf King Leman Russ alone, all the while fending off attacks and advances from the rest of the Space Wolves against the Thousand Sons. Magnus's goal was to protect the remainder of his sons for a final right. With all things being considered, Leman was outmatched by Magnus. Without the outside distractions and interferences, Magnus would have, in my opinion, taken Leman apart. Leman Russ lost a heart, but in the end, a blind swing from Leman struck Magnus in his remaining eye. Leman took advantage of the momentary shock to the Primarch of the Thousand Sons, lifting Magnus over his head and breaking the Crimson King's back over his knee. As Russ raised his sword to behead Magnus, something happened, and both Magnus and his legion vanished, only to reappear on the planet of the Sorcerers, deep within the Eye of Terror.
Delightful place. Summers so spectacular.
I sense sarcasm.
Correct.
I said sorcery and lies!
Which brings me along to the conclusion of this. What was the Emperor's mistake, the greatest one in dealing with Magnus? While not as ridiculous as the theory that Leman Russ had, the Emperor actually did not make an error in sending the wolves to Prospero. Ahriman?
Yes?
Keep Weirdmake's mouth shut during this.
With pleasure.
When the Emperor sent the wolves of Fenris to Prospero, it was not to lay siege to the planet and kill Magnus the Red. Far from it. Even though the Emperor was not exactly pleased with the results of Magnus's astral trip to Terra, he did not want Magnus killed. Far from it. He might not have cared about the Thousand Sons, but he wanted Magnus brought to him. It was only through the manipulations of fucking Horus that the 6th Legion came to Prospero to level it. The Emperor truly did nothing wrong in this regard. Horus convinced Russ that his orders had been changed, but even then, Leman Russ did not want to kill Magnus. The biggest problem between all three parties in this, Russ, Magnus, and the Emperor, was hubris in their own judgments. Russ was fully convinced that Magnus had a spy in his ranks and fully convinced that he had found that spy when the spy was nothing more than a pawn of chaos all along. He was convinced that Magnus was treacherous because of his own biases. And because of those biases, Leman Russ and his wolves tried to exterminate a loyalist legion. Magnus was under the complete conviction that he knew better than everyone else until absolute disaster proved to him that he did not. His desire to prove not only himself but the cause for the esoteric led him into terrible decision after terrible decision. At this point, he was not fully committed to chaos, and he only eventually turned fully to chaos after the events that I will go into in the next mistakes of the Emperor. The Emperor, in his own hubris, left the Council of Nikea without informing the most inquisitive of his sons what he truly intended to do after he stripped that same son of the majority of his purpose. The Edict of Nikea was never, and I repeat, never going to stick around for long, and the Emperor knew as much. If he had entrusted his sons with his true goals, none of this would have occurred. But the Emperor had an extremely good reason for not telling his sons his true goals, which, again, I will go into in the next mistakes of the Emperor. Suffice to say, I'll be repeating again, the Emperor did not understand his sons. And that lack of understanding was going to pave the way for Magnus's true fall. But back to the aftermath of the Battle of Prospero. Only 1/10 of the 1,000 sons escaped Prospero, while the entirety of Prospero itself died as a result. 1,242,000 sons in total. And if you add 1, 2, 4, and 2, the number you get is 9, which is the holy number of Tzeentch.
Justice Clan!
All other forces that defended Prospero and every civilian that didn't see the writing on the wall and fled before the wolves arrived also died. Of the 73,200 space wolves, only 50,200 survived. 23,000 space wolves died during this assault. Over half of the Imperial Army elements died as well, and the losses of the Sisters of Silence as well as the Custodes were substantial. It is fair to say, without any reservation, that if Magnus's heart had been in the fight and the 1,000 sons were waiting on the wolves, the cost of victory would have been substantially higher, if the 6th would have won at all. Outnumbered 7-1 in terms of Astartes alone and attacked with no warning, the 1,000 sons managed to kill a full third of the wolves.
Yes, he did. He did kill a third of us with the use of sorcery.
Oh, come on, the last thing I showed you before I threw your souls to the void was the truth about where your powers come from.
Well, they come from the ice storms of Fenris. Why are you cricketing me? I am right. We rune priests harness the fierce storms of Fenris to do our weird.
Weird equals sorcery.
No. It is not sorcery. Nay, it is not. It is weird.
Okay, let me put this in a language you can understand. Listen here, you wolfing bastard. I'm wolf of your wolf. Wolf makes you wolf bull wolf. You have the same wolfing wolf that has wolfed in the same wolfing way, but somehow it's weird and not wolf, because wolf said wolf and you wolfing bought that?
What?
Oh, fuck. You understood that.
What you need is wolf to take a wolf on your wolf and wolf to the wolfing wolf. How can you wolf when you wolf, you wolfing wolf? Wolf!
Okay, I'm done. I'll be over here.
What in the wolf did you just howl and say about me, you little milksop? I'll have you know I was thrown to the top of my tribe and
hello.
Russ, and I've been involved in numerous executions of traitor projects.
So lovely to meet you. Has the Emperor blessed your day?
Yes. The Emperor is abundantly blessings. Oh, the gods get me.
What chapter are you from, noble Astartes?
Chapter! The Blood Ravens, yes. I am from the Blood Ravens. Knowledge is power, guard it well.
Blood Ravens. How delightful. Commissar!
Yes, Sister Evelyn.
I'm going to go lock up the reliquary.
Very well, Sister Evelyn. So what's the final verdict? The Emperor and Magnus were very much alike in the fact that they both were utterly convinced that their way of thinking was the right way. The only way. Magnus, in his effort to prove not only himself but the validity of psychic power, destroyed anything the Imperium could have been. The Emperor did much the same to himself, but for different reasons. Firstly, by not telling Magnus himself about the Webway project and bringing him instantly to Terra, but also refusing to believe that Horus could have actually turned on him. The reason for both of these things is, as I have stated before, hubris. The Emperor actually had a reason not to inform all of his sons what he was doing on Terra, but I still believe he should have brought Magnus to Terra and showed him himself. It's often questioned why he wouldn't have told Magnus of all people, but at the same time, if you're the Emperor, and you believe wholeheartedly you have literally everything figured out and know exactly what you're going to accomplish, then why would you bring along anyone who would at best question your methods and at worst hinder them? Magnus was an idealist, and to readers it's one of his more endearing traits, but that is not a trait the Emperor would have appreciated in his ear working every day on the very project that had been the end goal of the Emperor's entire plan. It didn't matter that Magnus was involved at the very end of it. This wasn't even the first time that the Emperor had kept secrets from his sons, but it was the most drastic and overt. There are several instances peppered throughout the Horus Heresy series where the Emperor had his sons mind wiped to keep critical information a close secret, including Horus. So if this was his final victory condition, it not only makes sense he wouldn't speak openly of it, it also makes sense he wouldn't open the door for help. In this instance, I am not saying the Emperor made the perfect call. I actually believe he made a mistake not bringing Magnus to Terra immediately after the Council of Nikea. I'm only saying it's well within the scope of the character of the Emperor himself to have done this. Not only that, but as I have stated, the Emperor knew very well sooner or later one or more of his sons would eventually betray him. The Imperial Webway project was going to be the instrument that made something like that entirely impossible, or at the very least a lot more difficult. The reasons the Emperor didn't tell his sons about the Webway project are a far different matter altogether, which again is going to be covered on the next Voxcast of Mistakes of the Emperor. At the end of the day, the fact the Emperor couldn't bring himself to believe that Horus had turned on him is no surprise. Of all the Primarchs, the Emperor had showered Horus with the most praise and had spent more time with him and had lifted him up the highest. While most of his sons the Emperor treated as tools, Horus was perhaps the only one that ever approached gaining something of genuine affection from the Master of Mankind. Not even Magnus approached this, even though the Emperor treated Magnus differently, again, from the rest of his sons. So what was the greatest mistake of the Emperor as it related to Magnus? Like father, like son. They both thought they knew better than anyone else, and they both did not trust each other. And they both only realized the gravity of that mistake when they met each other's eyes, in the depths of the Imperial dungeon, at the death of the Imperium.
Can I leave now?
Oh, for fuck's sake, yes! In the last 5 Voxcasts, it's been my privilege to put some of the actions of the Emperor of Mankind into context, to point out flaw or provide reasoning. It's time to do the same to this.